All right, today we are going to move forward in reviewing slope. None of this is going to be anything different than what you saw yet in Algebra 1, but I felt like it was very important to review this before we get to the basic point of our unit. Now, we will be on page 11 in your new packet, Unit 3 packet, and what we're going to review today is the slope-intercept form, which is right here in the middle of your screen in the box. I'm going to attempt to highlight here because that's my favorite thing to do. Right here is your slope-intercept form. If you look down here in the big box, they do a really good job, nice big pictures, of showing you that the m in the equation is the slope, which is really what we're going to care about as we go through this unit. But it doesn't hurt to remind ourselves and remember that B is our y-intercept. Now, what is a y-intercept? I'm going to label that here. That is where the line, whoops, I'm still in yellow. That is where the line crosses the y-axis. And that's why they called it a y-intercept, because the line intercepts the axis at that point. Now, when we have slope-intercept form, the slope is just, and this is another fancy algebra word, the coefficient or the number that is attached to the x term. So if you can locate the x term, you're good. Now, this only works when we have y equals mx plus b, or slope-intercept form. So in this example, we have a couple of examples here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go look for the x term, and then I'm going to highlight the number in front of it. Now, these are pretty easy examples. I'm hoping that many of you remember this from last year, but largely because of COVID, I wanted to be sure because I didn't know where everyone got to in their algebra classes. So we can say that the slope is 3. The slope is not 3x. It is just the number that is being multiplied by the x. So here we would say our slope is 2. Now, if you think about the lessons that we've been doing, remember we've been talking about x's in the numerator y's in the numerator and x's in the denominator, or rise over run. But remember, this means this in terms of slope. So this means that our rise is 3 and our run is 1 when it's a whole number. When it's a fraction, you have both of those numbers. Now here on page 12, if you would turn the page, this is where life tends to stress people out a little bit. This is when, and I'm going to write this at the top, this is when we don't have y equals mx plus b. Then we have a little extra work to do because our line is in some other form, like maybe standard form, which you see here. I'm going to put a big circle around it. That's standard form. And you can tell that that is different from slope-intercept form because it doesn't have the y by itself. That's the biggest thing about slope-intercept form. The y has to be by itself. So we would have to change standard form to slope-intercept form in order to get the slope. Right now, as the line looks in standard form, we cannot get the slope from it. So what do? Now this is kind of a general one, but I like the way they wrote it out. What they're going to try to do is they're going to try to get the y alone. So here we have to subtract the ax term from both sides, which is oftentimes what we have to do. So what we'll have is these will cancel, and we'll have by equals negative ax plus c. But then see, the y is still not alone. The y still has that b sticking to it, and that b is being multiplied. So we have to divide by b on both sides. And when we do it to one term, we have to do it to every term. Now this looks really complicated. A lot of teachers like to try to use this as like a formula, but I really don't want you to have to memorize that, so we're not going to do that. But I think if we can remember that we have to get y alone, then we can start to do this and get some repetition going, and we won't have to memorize anything. So let's take a look at this one. So the first question I ask myself is, okay, is the y alone? And I'm going to write that down here. Is the y alone? And if you look at this side of the equation, the y is not alone. The y has that 3x being added to it. So we need to move that 3x. And because the 3x is positive, we have to do the opposite of something being positive, which is negative, or we have to subtract it from both sides. And that's what we did on the previous example. We subtracted from both sides. So 3x minus 3x. And some of you might like to do this. That's fine. If you don't have to. But that will become 0. So now look at what's happening. The y is alone. And now we have our mx plus b. And so our slope in this situation is going to be that negative 3, that number, that coefficient that is attached or being multiplied to the x. Or negative 3 over 1. That works too. Let's try another one. So you know the first question I'm going to ask is y alone? And I think that you can see that it's not, because it has an x term with it. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to move that x term. So let's do that. The 3x is positive, so we subtract it. But if we subtract it, we have to subtract it from both sides. Sorry, my x got a little mangled there. Now 3x minus 3x, that cancels. So we'll have negative 3y equals negative 3x plus the 12 that was already there. And the thing is, y is still not quite alone, though it is better. We did make progress. But now we have to get this negative 3 away from it. And the negative 3 is being multiplied. So we're going to divide by negative 3. But if I do it on the left-hand side, remember that I have to divide by negative 3 on the right-hand side. And I like to divide it by every term like that. That way no one feels left out. So the negative 3 divided by negative 3 is 1y, or just y. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 times the x is just 1x, or just x. And 12 divided by negative 3 is -4. So in this case, our slope is 1. Even though we don't have a 1 sitting out here, 1x is the same thing as x. And I just want to add on to this one particular problem. I should have done it before. But the y-intercept here, remember, is your b. So your y-intercept is just right here, is -4. And that's something to know. I think it's important to know that, especially if you need to graph a line. One more. We have y is not alone. I'm going to ask that question. I'll ask it pretty much every time. We'll see what we have to do. We can't get the slope until the y is isolated. Now this one is interesting because the 2x is negative. So if we subtract it, it's not going to cancel out. We have to do the opposite, which is to add it to both sides. So the -2x plus the +2x cancels. And look at that, the y is alone. The y coefficient is 1, and that's great. So our slope, we are done. We don't have to do any of that dividing. Is 2, or 2 over 1, and our y-intercept is +3. And that's how we do that. And we are going to be practicing that. That's super important. It's not going to go away after geometry class has, been completed and you've passed geometry. That is still going to be there when you go on to your next math class. So that is why we are reviewing it.